Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy History Channel. Tonight, we drift back through time to the roar of ancient crowds, the shimmer of polished armor, and the strange world of men who fought for glory beneath the Roman sun. This is not the history of emperors and senators, but of those who stepped barefoot into the sand, carrying swords, nets, and shields, facing both danger and destiny. The gladiators of Rome were more than just fighters. They were symbols of power, pawns of politics, and sometimes, to the astonishment of their audience, heroes who won fame that outlived them by centuries. Their stories are stitched into mosaics, whispered in poetry, and etched into the walls of ruined amphitheaters that still stand, silent and watchful, across Europe today. If you enjoy these journeys into history, you might consider liking and subscribing, or sharing your favorite fact down in the comments. It helps others find their way here too, one sleepy soul at a time. But for now, settle in. Let your mind soften as we uncover the fascinating world of Roman gladiators. Let's begin. Gladiators were often slaves, but not always. The Roman arena is often imagined as a place where men were forced to fight, and for many, that was true. Prisoners of war, rebels captured in distant provinces, and criminals condemned by Roman courts all found themselves thrust into gladiator schools, stripped of choice. Yet not every gladiator entered in chains. Some free men, known as auctorati, signed contracts to become fighters, willingly surrendering their rights for the chance at pay, glory, or escape from crushing debt. To Romans, this was both shocking and fascinating. Why would anyone volunteer for such a brutal life? But for the volunteers, the lure was undeniable. The arena promised fame, steady food, and perhaps even a path to immortality in the memory of the crowd. In this paradox, the gladiator's story becomes richer, a mixture of compulsion and choice, desperation and ambition, all converging in the roar of the amphitheater. Gladiators trained in harsh schools known as ludi. A gladiator's journey began in the ludus, the training school. These were not casual academies but tightly run military-style camps. Barracks lined with narrow beds housed the fighters, while courtyards rang with the clash of practice weapons. Strict discipline was enforced by trainers, often retired gladiators themselves, who knew the realities of combat firsthand. Guards patrolled the grounds to prevent escape, and punishments were severe for those who broke the rules. Yet the ludus was also a place of transformation. Men arrived as captives, criminals, or volunteers, but within those walls they were molded into athletes capable of enduring pain, fatigue, and the pressure of thousands of watching eyes. To step out of the ludus into the arena was to emerge as something entirely new, part warrior, part performer, and part sacrifice to the expectations of Roman society. A gladiator's daily life was more regimented than a soldier's. Inside the training schools, the day followed a strict rhythm. At dawn, the fighters were roused for drills, footwork, sparring, and endless repetition with heavy practice weapons that built stamina and precision. Meals were scheduled at regular intervals, designed not for luxury but for fuel. Rest times were enforced, ensuring bodies recovered enough to fight another day. Unlike soldiers who marched from one battlefield to another, gladiators lived in confinement, every movement watched by overseers. Evenings were quieter, with men tending to wounds, sharpening skills, or exchanging stories of past fights. The rigid schedule was meant to break weakness and build resilience. For some, it felt like imprisonment. For others, it was the only path to survival. Within those routines, gladiators learned not only how to fight, but how to endure. And endurance was often the difference between a fleeting moment of fame and a forgotten fall in the sand. Their diet was packed with barley and beans, not meat. Popular imagination often pictures gladiators feasting on roasted meat, but archaeology has revealed a very different truth. The bones of fighters unearthed in ancient cemeteries show a diet rich in grains and legumes, especially barley and beans. This earned them the nickname orderi, barley men. These foods provided slow-burning energy and bulk, building a solid layer of body fat that helped protect vital organs during combat. Far from being a mark of weakness, this extra padding could mean the difference between a shallow wound and a fatal one. Meat was present, but far less central than one might expect. Instead, gladiators were sustained by the humble staples of the Roman pantry. To the crowd, they may have looked like hardened warriors of iron. But beneath the armor, their strength came from the quiet power of grains and beans, fueling their bodies for the spectacle of the games. Gladiators drank strange tonics made from ashes. Beyond food, gladiators consumed unusual drinks to aid recovery. Ancient texts describe a tonic made from plant ashes mixed with water or vinegar, creating a mineral-rich brew thought to strengthen bones and ease fatigue. Modern analysis of gladiator remains has confirmed elevated levels of calcium, suggesting these ash tonics were not myth, but practice. To Roman eyes, the ritual of drinking ashes carried a strange symbolic weight, warriors consuming the remnants of fire as if taking its resilience into themselves. Though it may sound unappetizing today, the concoction likely worked as an early form of a sports supplement, replenishing minerals lost in sweat and strain. Just as modern athletes gulp protein shakes and electrolyte drinks, gladiators relied on their own era's recipes, blending the practical with the mystical in their pursuit of survival and victory in the arena. Training began with wooden weapons before the real ones. No man was handed a deadly sword on his first day in the ludus. Instead, new recruits trained with heavy wooden weapons, sometimes twice the weight of real blades. The purpose was twofold: to build strength and to instill discipline. Wooden swords and shields could bruise and batter, but they were less likely to cause fatal injuries during practice. Day after day, gladiators drilled with these tools until their movements became second nature: thrust, block, parry, sidestep. Only after proving skill and endurance would a fighter graduate to real iron weapons. This gradual progression ensured that when a gladiator finally stepped into the arena, his body and mind were already conditioned for combat. To the Romans, mastery of the wooden sword was a badge of patience and perseverance. To the gladiators themselves, it was the first threshold crossed on the long road to survival. Some gladiators carried shields as tall as themselves. Among the many types of gladiators, some fought behind towering shields nearly as tall as their own bodies. These massive defenses, called scuta, were curved to wrap protectively around the fighter. Combined with heavy armor, they transformed the gladiator into a walking fortress. But this protection came at a cost. Agility was sacrificed, and every movement was slower, more deliberate. To wield such a shield required immense stamina, for even holding it upright demanded strength. Spectators marveled at the contrast. One fighter weighed down by bulk, another darting quickly with minimal armor. The clash of styles thrilled audiences, each duel becoming a contest not only of skill, but of endurance and strategy. For the gladiator behind the giant shield, survival depended on turning his bulk into an advantage, weathering storms of blows until the right opening appeared. Others fought almost bare-handed with only a dagger. At the opposite extreme stood fighters armed with little more than a dagger, known as the palmula, or even smaller blades. Lightly armored, sometimes nearly unprotected, they relied on speed, cunning, and daring. Every fight was a razor's-edge gamble. One wrong step could mean disaster. Yet to the crowd, These gladiators embodied courage at its rawest. Men who stood exposed in the sand, daring fate with nothing but nerve and quick reflexes. Their bouts were often fast and electrifying, contrasting sharply with the slower struggles of heavily armed opponents. The tension between fragility and ferocity fascinated Roman audiences. To see a nearly bare-handed gladiator outwit a more powerful foe was to witness not just combat but theatre, a reminder that in the arena, survival was not always about armor or weapons, but about the spirit, cleverness of the fighter himself. Every gladiator type had its own distinct fighting style. The arena was not chaos, it was choreography. Each gladiator type had a carefully defined set of weapons, armor, and techniques that made them distinct. The Murmillo, with his heavy shield and sword, fought differently from the Retiarius, who wielded a net and trident. The Secutor was designed specifically to counter the net fighter, his smooth helmet deflecting entanglement. The Threeks carried a curved blade, while others specialized in speed or brute strength. These combinations were intentional, creating battles that played out like living chess matches, strength against speed, defense against agility, tradition against innovation. The variety kept audiences enthralled, for no two pairings were ever the same. To Romans, the gladiators embodied archetypes, predator and prey, hunter and hunted, shield and spear. Each style told a different story, ensuring that every match was as much spectacle as it was combat. Some gladiators specialized in heavy armor. Among the many types who stepped into the Roman arena, some chosor were assigned the role of human fortress. These men were clad in thick helmets, body armor, greaves, and carried shields broad enough to block an oncoming rush. Their movements were slower, every step measured and deliberate, but their protection was immense. For the audience, these heavily armored gladiators symbolized strength and determination, standing solid against their foes. Their fights were often long, grinding contests, where the ability to endure was as vital as the ability to strike. But the weight of their armor came at a cost. Fatigue set in quickly, vision was limited, and their agility was greatly reduced. Still, when such a gladiator advanced shield first across the sand, it created a sense of inevitability, like a wall moving forward. They were the embodiment of resilience, testing whether sheer endurance could triumph over speed and cunning. Others fought with minimal protection for speed. If heavily armored fighters seemed like walking fortresses, others were the opposite, agile and nearly unarmored. These gladiators fought with small shields, or sometimes no shield at all, wearing little protection on their bodies. Instead, they trusted in their ability to move quickly, to strike and retreat before their opponent could react. Their style turned every match into a dance across the sand, where timing and reflex mattered more than brute force. The crowd loved them because each dodge or narrow escape carried real danger. One mistake, one missed step, could mean disaster. Yet when they triumphed, it was electrifying, a living demonstration that speed could overcome strength and agility could outwit armor. Their fight reminded spectators that there was more than one path to survival, and that sometimes the boldest gamble was to face an ironclad opponent with little more than courage and quickness. Gladiators were paired for maximum drama. The matchups in the arena were carefully designed, not left to chance. Organizers chose pairs that would provide the most contrast and excitement, making sure the spectacle kept audiences engaged. A slow, heavily armored warrior might be placed against a light, agile opponent. A shield bearer could be tested against a net and trident fighter. The contrast of styles created tension, ensuring that each fight unfolded with uncertainty. To the Romans, the games were not just about combat, but about theater. The audience wanted suspense, reversals, and a story told through movement and struggle. Every pairing was like a living puzzle: strength against speed, defense against cunning, raw power against careful strategy. These matchmakers were, in a sense, directors, turning the sand of the amphitheater into a stage where human bodies became both performers and characters. In this way, gladiatorial combat was less random brawl and more living drama. Each gladiator type had a unique fighting style. Gladiators were not a single group of men fighting in the same way. Each type had a carefully defined role, marked by specific weapons, armor, and tactics. The Murmillo fought like a Roman soldier, shield high and sword ready. The retiarius, armed only with a trident and net, embodied agility and trickery. The secutor was designed specifically to counter him, smooth-helmeted and relentless. The threeks, with his curved blade, brought slashing unpredictability. These categories were part of the spectacle. The Romans delighted in seeing how different styles clashed against one another. It turned the games into living experiments in combat, testing whether speed could outlast armor or cunning could defeat brute strength. For the crowd, variety ensured no fight was the same. For the gladiators, their style became an identity, shaping how they trained, fought, and were remembered in graffiti, mosaics, and whispers of their names long afterward. The heavily armed Murmillo wielded a short sword. One of the most iconic gladiator types was the Murmillo. His helmet bore a large crest resembling the fin of a fish, a visual link to his name, which came from the Latin word for a kind of saltwater fish. He carried a broad rectangular shield, the scutum, and a short sword called the gladius. His fighting style mirrored the discipline of Rome's legions: steady advances, calculated thrusts, and unshakable defense. To many in the audience, the Murmillo represented Rome's military strength reborn in the arena, a familiar image turned into entertainment. But despite his heavy protection, the Murmillo was not invincible. Quick-footed opponents could exploit his slower pace, testing his endurance. His duels often became contests of patience, the Murmillo wearing down his rival until a decisive strike could be delivered. To see him in combat was to witness the Roman ideal of disciplined power given flesh. The Netan trident fighter was called a retiarius. The retiarius was unlike any other gladiator. He carried no shield, wore little armor, and his face was exposed, making him seem almost defenseless. Yet his weapons made him a predator. With a trident in one hand and a weighted net in the other, he fought like a fisherman turned hunter. His tactic was to snare his opponent with the net, then thrust with the long trident while staying out of reach. The retiarius relied on agility, constantly moving, circling, and waiting for the perfect opening. To the crowd, he embodied daring and unpredictability. His battles were filled with suspense because every toss of the net could suddenly change the outcome. Though mocked at times for seeming less masculine than heavily armored fighters, the retiarius provided some of the most thrilling spectacles. He was a reminder that in the arena, brains and speed could sometimes conquer brute strength. The secutor's helmet was designed to counter the retiarius. The secutor existed for one reason: to hunt the retiarius. His name meant the pursuer, and his armor reflected his purpose. His helmet was smooth, with tiny round eye holes that made it impossible for the net to catch. His shield and sword mirrored those of the Murmillo, but his strategy was different. He had to press forward constantly, closing the distance before the retiarius could snare him or strike from afar. This relentless pursuit created thrilling contests, the secutor charging like a predator, while the retiarius darted away, waiting for a mistake. To the audience, their duels were a clash of opposites: heavy armor against bare skin, shield against net, close combat against long reach. The Secutor's presence ensured that the retiarius was never too dominant, reminding spectators that in Rome's arena, every advantage had its answer, and every predator could become prey. The Thracians fought with a curved sword. The Thracians, or Thracian, was named after warriors from the Balkans, regions Rome had conquered. His distinctive weapon was the Seeker, a short curved sword with a hooked edge. This unusual blade was designed to reach around an opponent's shield, striking from angles that straight swords could not. He carried a small square shield, lighter than those of the Mirmillo or Secutor, and his armor often included protective greaves on his legs. His style was fast, tricky, and unpredictable, relying on quick bursts of offense rather than steady defense. To Romans, the Thracians represented both exoticism and danger, a reminder of foreign enemies now transformed into entertainment. His fights were a spectacle of surprise as he darted in with unexpected strikes. For the crowd, the Thracians was proof that the arena contained not just Roman order, but echoes of the wider world the empire had subdued. Some gladiators carried shields taller than themselves. Few sights impressed a Roman audience more than a gladiator hidden behind a shield taller than his own body. These massive scuta curved inward, creating a portable wall of wood, leather, and iron. A fighter could crouch behind it and be nearly invisible, advancing step by step like a fortress come alive. The shield offered incredible protection, but it was punishingly heavy. Just lifting it required immense strength, and sustaining it under the hot sun drained stamina quickly. The duel became a battle of endurance, the shield-bearer weathering blow after blow until the right chance emerged. To the crowd, the sight was both awe-inspiring and suspenseful. A lone man hidden inside a moving wall, betting his survival on patience. These towering shields showed how gladiators were not just men, but living symbols of resilience, their very weapons embodying the struggle between power, defense, and the human body's limits. Others carried only a dagger and their courage. At the other end of the spectrum were gladiators who entered the sand with little more than a dagger. Against shield-bearing and armor-clad opponents, they seemed absurdly vulnerable, yet their roar was deliberate. These fighters relied on speed, cunning, and audacity, darting close to strike at unprotected areas. Their matches were high risk, high reward, electrifying in their tension. Every move had to be precise, every attack perfectly timed, for one mistake meant the end. To the audience, these duels were among the most thrilling, as the dagger fighter appeared to defy reason simply by surviving. If he won, the crowd erupted in awe, for it proved that even the smallest weapon could prevail with skill and daring. If he lost, his bravery was remembered. In the balance of armor and exposure, the dagger carrier symbolized raw courage, the purest gamble of life against death in Rome's arena. Gladiators trained daily like professional athletes. Life in the ludus, the gladiator school, was defined by relentless routine. At dawn, the men were roused by the sound of horns, called into the yard, and handed their wooden practice weapons. Hour after hour, they drilled the same moves: thrust, parry, sidestep, shield block. Trainers demanded perfection, punishing mistakes with lashes or extra drills. Yet to the Romans, this discipline was admirable. They admired the way gladiators turned their bodies into instruments of war, much like soldiers preparing for battle. The constant training built not only muscle but stamina, the ability to fight under blazing sun, weighed down by armor, cheered or mocked by thousands of eyes. In some ways, gladiators were the first professional athletes. Their entire lives focused on physical performance. To the crowd, this made them thrilling to watch. To the gladiators, it was survival, each movement a step closer to victory or defeat. Injuries were constant, even in training. Even before stepping into the arena, a gladiator's body bore scars. Training with wooden weapons was safer than steel, but not painless. Heavy wooden swords bruised arms and shoulders, and sparring bouts often left fighters with cuts, sprains, and broken bones. Training was designed to mimic the exhaustion and danger of real combat, so injury was almost inevitable. For a gladiator, pain became part of daily life, something to be endured without complaint. The Roman crowd admired stoicism. To flinch or cry out was seen as weakness. Yet behind the barrack walls there were groans, bandaged wounds, and long nights of recovery. Some men trained through pain, fearing that to show weakness might mean punishment. The arena was dangerous, but so too was the preparation. By the time a gladiator faced the crowd, he had already fought dozens of unseen battles, each one etched into his body like a secret history. Gladiators received expert medical care. Despite their harsh lives, gladiators were not left to fend for themselves. In fact, they often had access to better medical care than many ordinary Romans. Owners invested heavily in their fighters, seeing them as valuable property, and so they hired skilled doctors to keep them alive. These physicians learned to treat cuts, fractures, and deep wounds with surprising sophistication for the ancient world. They stitched injuries, reset bones, and even performed surgeries to save a gladiator's life. Some medical instruments recovered from sites like Pompeii and Ephesus show how advanced Roman surgical knowledge could be. In a strange way, gladiators became both patients and teachers, their injuries offering doctors endless opportunities to study the human body. The knowledge gained in the sands of the arena would influence Roman medicine for centuries, meaning the suffering of fighters left behind a legacy in the history of healing. Roman doctors learned from treating gladiators. The Roman Empire's understanding of anatomy and medicine was limited by law, and tradition dissecting human bodies was frowned upon. But gladiators provided doctors with rare chances to study wounds in real time. Physicians like Galen, who later became one of the most influential medical thinkers in history, trained in gladiator schools. There, he treated gashes, broken bones, and punctures, learning firsthand how the body reacted to trauma. What might have been tragedy for the fighters was, in the eyes of medical students, a living textbook. This exposure allowed Roman doctors to make remarkable advances in surgery, wound care, and anatomy, knowledge that would later influence both Islamic and European medicine. The arena, for all its brutality, became a kind of classroom, where blood and pain taught lessons that would echo through the centuries, shaping the foundations of Western medical practice long after Rome's fall. Fights didn't always end in death. Modern films often show every gladiator duel as a fight to the death, but in reality, many matches ended with both fighters still alive. Gladiators were valuable investments, costing their owners years of training, food, and care. Losing one in every fight would have been ruinously expensive. As a result, many contests ended after one man was wounded, disarmed, or simply exhausted. If he had fought bravely, the crowd might call for mercy, allowing him to live and fight again. To the spectators, the appeal was not endless bloodshed, but the thrill of watching skill and bravery under pressure. A match could be riveting without ending fatally, and owners were keen to preserve their stars for future games. The myth of constant death has stuck, but the truth is more nuanced. Gladiators fought to entertain, and survival was often part of the spectacle. Many matches were stopped at first blood. Some gladiatorial contests were decided not by death, but by the first sign of blood. These shorter duels, known as sign mission, allowed fighters to demonstrate skill and bravery without necessarily ending in tragedy. When one combatant drew blood, the fight could be halted and the wounded man spared. For the crowd, this still offered excitement. The moment of first blood was dramatic, a signal of victory and defeat. For the gladiators, it was a chance to prove their prowess while avoiding fatal risk. These fights were not always merciful. Sometimes wounds were deep and deadly despite the rules, but they show that gladiator games were far more complex than simple massacres. The Romans were fascinated not only by death, but by the artistry of combat itself. A well-placed cut could earn as much applause as a final killing blow, keeping the audience breathless with anticipation. The thumb's gesture decided a gladiator's fate. One of the most famous images of gladiatorial combat is the raised or lowered thumb, signaling life or death. Ancient sources describe this moment as a vote by the crowd, who would shout and gesture to the presiding official, often the emperor himself. If the audience demanded mercy, the vanquished gladiator might be spared to fight another day. If they demanded death, the victor would deliver the final blow. Yet the exact gesture remains uncertain. Was thumbs up the sign for mercy or for death? Roman writers used vague phrases, and later artists may have misinterpreted them. What is clear is that the fate of a beaten gladiator could rest on the whim of thousands, transformed into a single gesture. For the crowd, it was thrilling power. For the fighters, it was a terrifying reminder that survival depended not only on skill, but on public favor. We don't actually know which way the thumb pointed. Modern culture has convinced us that thumbs up meant mercy and thumbs down meant death in the Roman arena. But historians aren't so sure. Ancient texts describe the gesture only as pollis verso, literally, with turned thumb. But which way was it turned? Some scholars argue that a thumbs up may have actually signaled a death blow, imitating the motion of stabbing downward. A hidden thumb, tucked into a fist, might have meant to spare the defeated man. Others think the crowd simply pointed toward the chest of the fallen fighter to demand his end. The truth is, we don't know for certain. The famous image of an emperor pointing his thumb downward comes from 19th century art, not ancient evidence. So the dramatic thumbs up, thumbs down scene we all imagine may be more Hollywood than history, a reminder that myths often outlast the facts. Gladiators could win their freedom through valor. For a gladiator, freedom was the brightest dream. Though most began their careers enslaved or condemned, victory in the arena could bring a chance at liberty. A fighter who survived many battles and impressed the crowds might be awarded a rudis, a wooden sword symbolizing release from duty. To receive one was to step out of the arena as a free man, cheered by thousands. Some gladiators even earned enough money from their prizes to live comfortably afterward. Others chose to remain fighters, drawn to the fame and the rhythm of combat, even when they no longer had to fight. The possibility of freedom added a layer of suspense for the audience. Each victory could bring not only triumph, but redemption. For the gladiator, the rudis was more than wood. It was a key, a fragile chance at life beyond the sand, where chains no longer bound him. A freed gladiator received a wooden sword called a rudis. The most coveted reward for a gladiator was the rudis, a simple wooden sword. It might look plain compared to the glittering weapons of the arena, but it carried immense meaning. Presented in front of roaring crowds, the rudis symbolized freedom. A gladiator who received one was officially released from combat duty and could never again be forced to fight. Many kept their wooden sword for life, a cherished emblem of survival. Some placed it in family shrines, others displayed it proudly as proof of their courage. Yet the story didn't always end there. Some men, even after winning freedom, chose to return to the arena, signing new contracts as volunteers. For them, the sand had become a stage they could not leave behind. The Rudis, then, was not only a farewell gift, but a reminder that true freedom was as complex as the fights themselves. Some freedmen chose to keep fighting. Winning a wooden sword, the rudis, meant a gladiator was free at last. He could walk away from the arena, never again forced to fight for the crowd's amusement. Yet, surprisingly, some men declined this gift. They chose to remain in the ludus, signing new contracts as auctorati, volunteers. Why? For some, the arena had become their life, the only world they knew. Others craved the adoration of the crowds, the roar of tens of thousands of voices calling their name. A few found that the steady pay and the privileges of fame outweighed the uncertainties of freedom, where poverty or obscurity might await. To Romans, these men embodied both courage and strangeness. Warriors who had stared death in the face so many times that ordinary life outside the walls of the amphitheater felt pale by comparison. For them, the sand itself had become home. Victorious gladiators could become celebrities. For the most successful gladiators, the arena was a pathway to fame. Their names were etched on walls, sung in taverns, and whispered in markets. Victories were recorded in mosaics and graffiti, ensuring that even those who had never seen them fight could imagine their glory. Some gladiators gained the adoration of thousands, becoming household names. Crowds threw gifts, nobles showered them with rewards, and artists painted their likenesses. Unlike soldiers whose deeds were distant, gladiators fought before the very eyes of the people. Their courage was immediate, visceral, and unforgettable. A single spectacular duel could transform a man from an unknown fighter into a star whose fame rivaled that of actors and charioteers. For a society that celebrated bravery and strength, the gladiator was more than a warrior. He was a living legend, an embodiment of courage in the face of mortal danger. Gladiators appeared on mosaics and graffiti. Across the Roman world, gladiators were immortalized not only in official monuments, but in the everyday art of the people. In villas and bathhouses, mosaics depicted famous fighters in vivid detail, their weapons raised mid-battle, their helmets gleaming. On city walls, graffiti scratched by anonymous hands preserved their names, their victories, and sometimes their defeats. Fans wrote messages of admiration, cheering for their favorite fighters as though they were modern sports idols. These images bring us closer to the spectacle of the games, showing us which fighters captured the imagination of the crowd. For archaeologists today, these mosaics and inscriptions are invaluable windows into the past, preserving stories that official histories often overlooked. The fact that ordinary Romans decorated their homes with gladiatorial scenes reveals how deeply the games were woven into daily life. Entertainment, artistry, and memory combined in fragments of stone and paint. Their names were shouted like sports stars. Imagine standing in the Colosseum, surrounded by tens of thousands of voices, all chanting the same name. Gladiators, though often of humble or enslaved origins, could rise to such dizzying heights of fame that their names became known across the empire. Supporters cheered for their favorite fighters, just as modern fans cheer for athletes or musicians. Some gladiators developed reputations for bravery, skill, or even mercy, and these traits only added to their legend. Their names were painted on walls carved into stone or sung in the streets after a triumphant match. For a man who may once have been a prisoner or a slave, this recognition was intoxicating. The roar of approval was a currency as valuable as gold, and it promised a form of immortality. As long as the crowd remembered your name, your victories in the arena would echo far beyond your final battle. Some gladiators had fan clubs. The adoration of gladiators did not stop with cheers. Many of the most successful fighters gathered groups of devoted supporters, almost like sports teams today have fan clubs. In cities across the Roman Empire, groups of fans would inscribe messages on walls, praising their chosen hero and urging him on to victory. They would follow the progress of their favorite gladiator from match to match, celebrating victories and mourning defeats. Some even organized parades, carrying images of their champion through the streets. These fan clubs weren't just entertainment, they were communities, where people bonded over their shared admiration. To be the subject of such devotion was an extraordinary twist of fate for men who had once been prisoners or outcasts. In the roar of the arena, gladiators discovered not only danger, but also the strange, intoxicating loyalty of thousands who believed in their valor. Women wrote love notes about them. Among the graffiti discovered in places like Pompeii, one can still read the whispers of ancient admirers. Women wrote messages declaring their affection for gladiators, comparing them to gods, praising their courage, and even confessing secret loves. These inscriptions show us how gladiators captured the hearts of the Roman populace, especially women who admired their bravery and physical strength. For many Roman ladies, the gladiator represented a dangerous allure, a man both admired and condemned, heroic and forbidden. Roman writers complained about women swooning over these fighters, some of whom were slaves or foreigners. To the elite, this adoration was scandalous. To the fans, it was thrilling. These love notes, etched into walls nearly 2,000 years ago, reveal how powerfully gladiators stirred the imagination. They were not just entertainers in the sand, but figures of desire whose fame reached far beyond the arena. Even children collected gladiator souvenirs. Gladiators were not just heroes to adults, they were idols to children as well. Archaeologists have found toys modeled after gladiators, small figurines, wooden swords and miniature shields, much like action figures today. Children sketched gladiators on walls, played at mock battles in the streets, and even collected souvenirs tied to their favorite fighters. Merchants sold tokens stamped with the likeness of famous gladiators, which fans carried as lucky charms or keepsakes. For a Roman child, cheering in the stands of the Colosseum was as thrilling as a modern kid watching a championship game. And just as children today dream of being star athletes, some Roman boys dreamed of one day stepping into the arena. For their parents, this could be a nightmare, but for the boys themselves, the gladiator was a figure of courage and adventure, a hero to be imitated in play and in dreams. Roman poets described gladiators as handsome heroes. While some Romans viewed gladiators as criminals or slaves, others, especially poets and playwrights, admired them as figures of beauty and bravery. Writers compared them to gods and heroes from myth, describing the gleam of their armor and the grace of their movements. For the audience, the sight of a gladiator was not only about combat, but also about spectacle, a living artwork in motion. The danger of the arena gave their beauty an added intensity, a reminder that even the strongest man could fall at any moment. Roman women were said to swoon at the sight of their favorite fighters, and even senators found themselves captivated. Through the words of poets, gladiators were elevated into symbols of passion, strength, and fleeting glory. Long after the sand was swept clean, their beauty lingered in verse, immortalized by those who could not look away. Gladiators could be endorsed in popular culture. Just as modern athletes appear on posters and advertisements, Roman gladiators also became part of the city's visual culture. Their faces and names appeared on painted walls, on pottery, and even on oil lamps. Vendors sold small tokens stamped with their likeness, and taverns painted murals celebrating their victories. A successful gladiator was more than a fighter, he was a brand. People wanted to be associated with him, to carry reminders of his strength and bravery. This early form of celebrity marketing shows how deeply gladiators influenced Roman life. They were admired not only in the arena but in daily spaces. Kitchens, marketplaces, and even children's toys bore their image. For a man who may once have been a prisoner of war or a criminal, this was astonishing. Through fame, he crossed social boundaries, becoming a household name in a society that otherwise denied him full status. They sometimes appeared in advertisements. If you walked the streets of ancient Rome or Pompeii, you might see painted signs announcing an upcoming gladiator show. These advertisements, often scrawled on walls, listed the names of fighters scheduled to appear, much like a modern poster for a concert or sporting event. Some even included statistics, how many fights a gladiator had won, or what weapons he used. Seeing your favorite fighter's name painted in bold letters was enough to stir excitement in the crowd. Merchants joined in as well, using gladiator imagery to sell their goods, from wine to olive oil. A famous fighter's name could boost sales just as a celebrity endorsement does today. To the people of Rome, gladiators weren't just entertainers on the sand. They were part of the city's daily rhythm, appearing on walls, in markets, and in the imaginations of everyone awaiting the next great spectacle. Female gladiators existed in ancient Rome. When we picture gladiators, we often imagine men battling in the sand. But ancient Rome also saw women step into the arena. These rare fighters, recorded in inscriptions and mentioned by Roman writers, stunned audiences who were unaccustomed to seeing women in combat. Their presence was unusual enough to cause fascination and controversy in equal measure. For some spectators, the idea of women fighting was thrilling, a spectacle even more sensational than the usual duels. For others, it was shocking, a challenge to traditional Roman ideas about gender and propriety. Though far fewer in number than men, female gladiators proved that the arena could transform anyone, regardless of background, into a symbol of spectacle and courage. Their existence reminds us that the world of the gladiator was not fixed, but fluid, always pushing boundaries and testing the limits of what the public was willing to cheer. They were called gladiatresses. The women who fought in the Roman arenas were known as gladiatresses. This feminine form of gladiator is rarely found in surviving texts, but ancient historians like Cassius Dio described female fighters taking part in the games. The very fact that a special word had to be coined for them shows how unusual they were. Unlike male gladiators, who were often enslaved soldiers or condemned criminals, gladiatresses were more frequently free women who volunteered for the chance to experience the thrill of combat. They fought with swords and shields, often adopting the same styles as their male counterparts. Their battles fascinated audiences, both for their rarity and for the shock value of women publicly engaging in what Romans considered a man's role. Though some emperors banned their participation, the memory of the gladiatrix endured, echoing through ancient art, inscriptions, and later imagination as symbols of daring and defiance. Female gladiators were rare, but celebrated. Though only a handful of references to female gladiators survive, they reveal how extraordinary these women must have seemed. Most Romans never expected to see women fighting in public, and when they did, the event caused a sensation. Some spectators were scandalized, while others were captivated, treating these women as exotic stars of the games. Ancient writers described them with fascination, marveling at their courage and beauty. Even though they were few in number, their presence left a lasting impression. Archaeologists have uncovered a relief from Halicarnassus showing two women fighters, their names inscribed as Amazon and the Kylia. These names, drawn from myth, suggest that female gladiators were often given heroic or legendary personas to heighten the spectacle. Though history has mostly forgotten them, the women who fought in the arena stood as bold symbols of defiance, captivating Rome in ways their male counterparts sometimes could not. Some women fought bare-chested in the arena. One of the more startling accounts of female gladiators comes from descriptions of women fighting bare-chested. To Roman audiences, this was part of the spectacle. The shock of seeing women in roles of combat, stripped of the clothing that symbolized modesty and respectability. For the fighters themselves, the lack of armor meant even greater vulnerability. Without heavy breastplates, they relied on speed and skill, knowing that a single strike could prove fatal. Roman writers often used these moments as examples of decadence, signs, they said, that the empire had grown too hungry for sensational entertainments. Yet the crowd roared with fascination, unable to look away. These unusual performances blurred the lines between sport, art, and provocation. To the women who stepped into the sand under such conditions, every match was both a fight for survival and a defiant statement against the rigid roles Roman society imposed upon them. Emperors sometimes banned female gladiators. Not everyone approved of women fighting in the arena. Some Roman emperors, concerned about morality and tradition, tried to suppress the practice. In the 2nd century, Emperor Septimius Severus officially banned female gladiators, declaring that such spectacles were inappropriate. To conservative Romans, women in combat challenged the natural order, undermining the strict boundaries between male and female roles. Yet the very need for laws shows how popular female gladiators had become, at least with certain audiences. Even when banned, stories of these women circulated in poems, rumors, and art. Their rarity made them all the more fascinating, and their memory persisted long after they were gone. In this tension between prohibition and fascination, we see a reflection of Rome itself, a society torn between tradition and spectacle, morality and entertainment, discipline and indulgence. The gladiatrix was both outlaw and legend, a fleeting but unforgettable presence in Roman history. Yet they reappeared in special festivals. Even after emperors tried to forbid women from fighting in the arena, exceptions were sometimes made. During lavish festivals or celebrations of imperial victories, female gladiators could be brought back as novelties. Their appearances were rare and brief, but they left audiences astonished. These events were not about skillful combat so much as spectacle, a way to surprise and thrill the crowd with something unusual. Ancient writers noted that the presence of women fighters was treated as entertainment of the most extravagant kind. For the emperors, showcasing gladiatrices was a way of demonstrating power and wealth, proof that Rome could command not only men but also women to fight for its amusement. Though their careers were short and often sensationalized, these women carved out a unique place in history, reminding us that even in the rigid world of Rome, boundaries could sometimes be bent for spectacle. Some gladiators were paired against wild animals. Gladiators did not always fight each other. In many spectacles, men were pitted against wild animals, lions, leopards, bears, or even crocodiles brought from Africa and Asia. These shows, known as venations, thrilled Roman audiences who marveled at the bravery of a man facing teeth and claws with only a sword or spear. For the gladiators, it was an ordeal like no other. Animals were unpredictable, leaping, charging, or clawing, without the discipline of a trained opponent. Survival required not only strength but quick thinking and nerves of steel. Sometimes the fighters prevailed, killing beasts that had been captured and transported across continents. Other times the animals triumphed, and the crowd gasped as a gladiator fell beneath their power. To the Romans, these battles symbolized the empire's dominion over nature itself, the ability to bring the wildest creatures into the heart of civilization and master them with spectacle. Lions, bears, and leopards were used in the arena. The Roman passion for exotic animals knew no bounds. Lions were shipped from North Africa, their roars echoing through the Colosseum as they leapt at gladiators or condemned criminals. Bears came from the forests of Europe, massive and terrifying. Leopards, quick and deadly, were prized for their speed and elegance. The effort to capture and transport these beasts was enormous, requiring entire hunting expeditions, ships and handlers. For the crowd, the sight of such animals was astonishing. Many Romans had never seen a lion or leopard before, so watching one stalk across the sand was an experience both terrifying and mesmerizing. For the gladiators who faced them, the challenge was overwhelming, a contest against nature's fiercest predators. These spectacles were less about fair combat and more about wonder, showing Rome's power to command creatures from the farthest reaches of the known world, even if it meant great cost. Sometimes gladiators hunted exotic beasts. Not all gladiators fought other men. Some specialized in the dangerous art of animal hunts, known as bestiarii. These fighters faced lions, tigers, bulls, and bears in staged spectacles called venations. Armed with spears, bows, or even simple knives, they entered arenas transformed into artificial forests or deserts. The sand was decorated with trees, rocks, and even painted scenery, creating a stage for a deadly hunt. The bestiarius needed nerves of steel, for a single misstep could bring a predator's claws or horns crashing down. Yet the crowd loved these performances. They were part sport, part theatre, and part proof of Rome's dominion over nature. To see a man bring down a lion in front of tens of thousands was breathtaking, even if it meant the death of a rare and exotic creature. For the gladiator, it was one more way to risk everything for fame and survival. Gladiators could even fight elephants. On rare and spectacular occasions, gladiators faced animals so massive that the contests seemed impossible. Elephants brought from Africa and India were paraded into the arena as living trophies of Rome's conquests. Sometimes they were pitted against armed men in battles that shocked and amazed the crowds. To see a human fighter stand before such a giant was almost unimaginable, the contrast between fragile man and towering beast creating overwhelming drama. The Romans loved the symbolism. A gladiator striking at an elephant represented Rome's power to conquer even nature's greatest creatures. For the fighters, however, these matches were unimaginably dangerous. An elephant's strength and size could crush armor and bone with ease. If on rare occasions, gladiators triumphed, and their names were remembered as men who had defeated the impossible. To the audience, such battles were not just entertainment, but living proof of Rome's unstoppable might. Exotic animals were imported across the empire. To keep the Roman crowds amazed, organizers scoured the empire for animals unlike any the city had ever seen. Lions came from North Africa, leopards from the Middle East, crocodiles floated in from the Nile, and even giraffes were brought across the Mediterranean. These creatures were captured with great difficulty, transported in cages, and paraded through Rome as proof of the empire's reach. To the Roman audience, each animal was a living trophy of conquest, a reminder that their empire stretched across deserts, jungles, and mountains. For gladiators, however, these animals were far more than symbols. They were deadly opponents. Facing claws, horns, or tusks required a rare mixture of courage and strategy. The crowd might gasp in awe at the sight of a lion leaping from its cage, but for the man standing on the sand, the moment was one of pure survival. Entire forests were recreated in the arena. The Colosseum was not just a ring of stone and sand. It was a stage where reality itself could be reshaped. For special games, crews of workers transformed the arena floor into a living landscape. Trees were hauled in, plants arranged, and even small hills constructed to mimic forests, deserts, or battlefields. Exotic animals were released into these settings, creating a living illusion of faraway lands. To the spectators, it was as though the empire's conquered territories had been transported to the heart of Rome. Gladiators and beast hunters fought in these artificial jungles, their battles framed by the rustle of leaves and the roar of the crowd. The sheer effort required, cutting, transporting, planting, then tearing it all down again, showed Rome's wealth and power. For the audience, the arena became a window onto the wider world, a reminder that nothing lay beyond the empire's grasp. Arenas had machinery to raise animals from below. Beneath the Colosseum lay a hidden world of pulleys, trapdoors, and elevators. This underground network, called the Hypogeum, allowed organizers to stage breathtaking surprises. Animals could be lifted suddenly from below, bursting into the arena as if by magic. One moment the sand was empty, the next, a lion or bear stood roaring before the crowd. Sometimes entire cages would rise into view, filled with exotic beasts. These sudden appearances added suspense, keeping the audience on edge. For the gladiators waiting to fight, the effect was far less thrilling. They never knew what creature might emerge from beneath their feet. The machinery required teams of workers pulling ropes and operating winches, hidden in the darkness below. The ingenuity of Roman engineering made the arena not just a battlefield, but a theater of illusions. In this way, the games dazzled the senses, blending engineering marvel with spectacle and fear. Gladiator games could last for days. A single day at the Colosseum was rarely enough to satisfy Rome's appetite for spectacle. Many gladiator festivals lasted for several days, sometimes stretching into weeks. Each morning began with wild animal hunts, followed by public executions at midday, and finally, the eagerly awaited gladiator combats in the afternoon. The crowd could come and go, but for many, the games became a daily ritual, a cycle of anticipation, excitement, and exhausted satisfaction. Emperors used these extended festivals to keep the public entertained and distracted, offering endless bread and spectacle. For gladiators, the longer festivals meant more matches, more chances to win prizes, but also greater risk. Injuries could pile up quickly, and a fighter might be called to the sand again before fully recovering. For spectators, though, it was a season of awe, when the heartbeat of the city itself seemed to echo with the clash of swords. Some festivals stretched over weeks. The grandest festivals in Rome were not brief entertainments, but vast celebrations that could last for weeks on end. These events marked victories in war, honored gods, or celebrated the emperor's power. Entire calendars were reshaped around them, with citizens flooding the Colosseum day after day. Imagine the anticipation. The city buzzing with excitement, vendors filling the streets, families carrying food and drink to the stands. Each day brought new spectacles, morning hunts, midday dramas, evening duels, a rhythm of violence and festivity that defined Roman life. For the emperors, hosting such long games was a way of buying loyalty, giving the people unforgettable entertainment, while reminding them of imperial generosity. For gladiators, weeks-long festivals meant exhaustion, danger, and the relentless demand to perform. For the Roman crowd, however, these festivals turned ordinary days into legends, a living celebration of empire and spectacle under the open sky. The Colosseum could seat tens of thousands. The Colosseum, Rome's most famous amphitheater, was a marvel of engineering and scale. Completed in the 1st century CE, it could hold between 50,000 and 80,000 spectators, a number staggering for the ancient world. Its design allowed huge crowds to enter and exit quickly, thanks to carefully planned corridors and stairways. The seating was arranged by social rank. Senators and nobles sat closest to the action, while ordinary citizens filled the upper levels. Women and the poor were placed furthest from the arena floor, From any seat, however, the spectacle was grand. The vast oval stage, the towering tiers of marble, and the canopy that could be unfurled to shield the crowd from the sun, all combined to create a sense of awe. For Romans, attending a game at the Colosseum was not just about entertainment. It was about being part of something larger than life itself. Admission was usually free. Despite the enormous costs of staging gladiatorial games, most Romans paid nothing to attend. Emperors and wealthy politicians funded the spectacles, footing the bill for the arena, the animals, the fighters, and the prizes. Why? Because offering free games was a powerful tool for winning public favor. The people of Rome expected to be entertained, and leaders who provided grand spectacles earned loyalty and gratitude. For the crowds, the games were a rare chance to enjoy luxury without cost. Families of every social rank could sit beneath the vast awnings of the Colosseum, eat food from vendors, and watch the drama unfold. The phrase, bread and circuses, captured this strategy. Feed the people and amuse them, and they will remain content. To the audience, the games were a gift. To the emperors, they were an investment in power, bought not with coins, but with the cheers of the masses. Emperors used games to win popularity. The gladiatorial games were more than entertainment. They were politics in motion. Roman emperors knew that the favor of the crowd was as valuable as the loyalty of the legions. By staging lavish spectacles, they could display their wealth, generosity, and control of the empire's resources. Thousands of citizens would gather in the Colosseum, feasting on free food while watching exotic animals, naval battles, and gladiatorial duels. The emperor presided over it all, visible to every eye. Each cheer was not only for the fighters in the sand, but also for the ruler who provided the spectacle. In times of unrest, emperors increased the number of games, buying peace with entertainment. For the people, the games were a holiday from hardship. For the emperor, they were a reminder of his power to provide, and a way to turn loyalty into a roar that shook the stones. The Colosseum was built with games in mind. When the Colosseum was constructed in the heart of Rome, it was designed as a monument to power, generosity, and spectacle. Its tiered seating allowed tens of thousands to view the games at once, while underground chambers, the hypogeum, enabled animals and fighters to rise dramatically into the arena. A complex system of pulleys, trapdoors, and lifts gave organizers endless opportunities for surprise, from sudden appearances of wild beasts to elaborate stage sets. The very shape of the amphitheater, an oval rather than a circle, ensured that no spectator was ever too far from the action. Everything about the building was meant to serve the drama of gladiatorial combat, from the acoustics of the crowd's roar to the sightlines of the duels below. For Romans, the Colosseum was more than stone and mortar. It was a symbol of empire, power, and the promise of unforgettable spectacle. Gladiator games could include naval battles. One of the most astonishing spectacles ever staged in Rome was the naumatia, a mock sea battle. For these rare events, organizers would flood the Colosseum or construct enormous basins filled with water. Specially built ships, sometimes modeled after famous war galleys, were floated into the arena. Crews of fighters, often prisoners, clashed with oars, spears, and even flaming projectiles. To the audience, it was breathtaking, a naval war recreated in the heart of the city. Imagine watching a trireme glide across the arena floor, its sails snapping as fighters leapt into combat. The effort required was extraordinary, involving water channels, pumps, and thousands of laborers. These battles were less about fairness and more about sheer wonder, a demonstration that Rome could command not only men and beasts, but even the seas themselves. For the crowd, a naumatia was the ultimate display of imperial power turned into theater. arenas were flooded for mock sea fights. One of the most astonishing feats of Roman engineering was the ability to transform an amphitheater into a temporary lake. Through a network of channels and underground cisterns, water was pumped into the Colosseum until the sand was replaced with a shimmering pool. Into this arena lake, wooden ships were floated, crewed by fighters prepared for staged naval battles called naumatia. The sight must have been breathtaking. Sails catching the wind, oars slapping the water, and men clashing across decks, all within stone walls meant for land combat. Sometimes these mock battles reenacted famous victories from Rome's history, letting the crowd relive the triumphs of their empire. For the gladiators, however, the conditions were terrifying. Heavy armor and water made survival even more precarious. Still, the sheer spectacle reminded the Roman people of their city's mastery, not just of land, but of the seas that bound their empire together. Special effects were used to impress crowds. Long before cinema or fireworks, the Romans were masters of live special effects. In the Colosseum, trapdoors opened without warning, releasing animals or hidden fighters. Stage machinery could make entire buildings rise from the sand, creating miniature towns or forests. Painted backdrops slid into place, while smoke and fire were used to mimic volcanoes or burning cities. Ingenious devices hurled flaming arrows or made gods appear to descend from the heavens. These effects turned gladiator games into more than fights. They were immersive performances, theatrical illusions designed to awe. To the spectators, the arena felt like a dream made real. One moment a battlefield, the next a mythic underworld. For the emperors, these illusions displayed Rome's technical brilliance, proving that their empire could bend not just men and beasts, but nature itself into obedience. The games dazzled the senses, turning violence into a kind of grand, living theater. Stage machinery created surprise entrances. Beneath the Colosseum stretched a labyrinth called the Hypogeum, tunnels, cages, and a network of pulleys and lifts. From here, gladiators and animals could be raised into the arena floor through hidden trapdoors. To the audience, it was magic. One moment, the sand was empty, the next. A wild boar or armored fighter appeared as if conjured from the earth itself. Some trapdoors were rigged to open suddenly under an unsuspecting fighter, dropping him into a hidden chamber where new challenges awaited. Others allowed entire sets, trees, rocks, even small temples to rise dramatically, creating instant scenery for staged battles. The element of surprise delighted the crowd, keeping them on edge, never sure what would appear next. For the gladiators, however, it meant stepping into the unknown. Each entrance could reveal an opponent, an animal, or even a staged death scene, demanding courage before the first blow. Hidden trapdoors filled the arena floor. The floor of the Colosseum was far from solid. Dozens of trapdoors dotted the sandy surface, each connected to an elaborate system of pulleys and winches below. These hidden hatches could open at any moment, releasing lions, bears, or even props for elaborate dramas. For the audience, it added suspense. They never knew when the ground itself might open to unleash danger. Imagine the thrill, a gladiator cornering his foe, only for a trapdoor to swing open and a wild beast to emerge. The arena was alive, unpredictable, and filled with secrets. Beneath the surface, teams of workers labored in darkness, hauling ropes and guiding animals into place. The trapdoors made the Colosseum a kind of giant stage machine, capable of transforming in an instant. To Romans, it was proof of their city's ingenuity. To the fighters, it was a reminder that the ground beneath their feet could never be trusted. Gladiators sometimes fought in reenactments of myths. Not every gladiatorial fight was a simple duel. Sometimes, the arena became a theater of legends, where fighters reenacted scenes from Greek and Roman mythology. A man might be dressed as Hercules, battling lions or mythical beasts. Another might take on the role of a villain from myth, destined to fall in spectacular fashion. These performances thrilled the crowd, who knew the stories well and watched eagerly to see how they would play out. The difference, of course, was that in the arena, the violence was real. A man playing a defeated character might be executed in front of thousands, his death turned into art. To the audience, it was myth made flesh, stories come alive in the sand. For the gladiator, it meant carrying the weight of a legend on his shoulders, knowing that the gods of the story and the eyes of Rome were upon him. Some battles were staged as historical dramas. Gladiator games were not only about individual duels, they were also a way to retell Rome's greatest victories. Organizers staged elaborate historical reenactments, transforming the arena into famous battlefields. Fighters dressed as Carthaginians, Gauls, or Persians, while others represented the disciplined Roman legions. The crowd relived past triumphs, as Rome's enemies were defeated again and again, sometimes by gladiators, sometimes by condemned prisoners forced to play the part. These performances blurred the line between history and theater, turning collective memory into spectacle. For the Roman people, it was a reminder of their empire's strength and destiny. For the fighters, however, playing the enemy could be a death sentence, as the script often demanded their defeat. Yet even in such rigged contests, courage shone through, and the crowd could be moved to admiration for the doomed performers who faced their fate with dignity beneath the blazing sun. Gladiators sometimes played the role of barbarians. Roman arenas often dramatized the empire's endless wars against foreign peoples. Gladiators were dressed as barbarians, wearing stylized costumes meant to represent Gauls, Thracians, or other conquered tribes. To the Roman audience, these portrayals confirmed their sense of superiority. They could watch their empire's enemies defeated again and again, this time within the safety of the Colosseum's walls. But for the gladiators, many of whom were themselves captured foreigners, the irony was sharp. A Gaul might find himself forced to play the role of a savage Gaul, fighting for his life before a crowd of jeering Romans. The costumes exaggerated foreignness, feathers, animal skins, or painted designs, turning men into living symbols of otherness. The spectacle was part war, part theater, and part mockery. To the crowd, it was thrilling. To the gladiator inside the mask, it may have felt like being conquered twice over. Prisoners could be forced into theatrical combat. Not all who entered the arena were trained gladiators. Sometimes prisoners of war or condemned criminals were forced to take part in staged battles. These performances were designed less as contests of skill and more as morality plays. A prisoner might be cast as a villain from myth or history, destined to die dramatically at the hands of a costumed gladiator. Others were sent into the arena with no training, armed poorly, facing wild animals or overwhelming odds. To the Roman audience, these were moments of thrilling spectacle, wrapped in the grandeur of myth. To the prisoners, it was a brutal end, transformed into entertainment. Their deaths were framed as both punishment and performance, a reminder of Rome's power over its enemies. Yet even in these staged defeats, some managed to win admiration from the crowd, proving that courage could shine even in certain death. Emperors occasionally fought in the arena. Though it may seem unthinkable, some Roman emperors stepped into the arena themselves. The most famous example was Emperor Commodus, who delighted in appearing as a gladiator. Dressed in armor, he fought before the crowds, claiming victory after victory. Of course, his matches were carefully arranged so that he would never be in real danger. His opponents were chosen to lose, or even armed with blunted weapons. Still, the sight of the emperor himself battling in the arena was shocking. To many Romans, it was thrilling, proof that their ruler was as brave as the heroes of old. To the senators and elites, however, it was scandalous, degrading the dignity of the empire. For Commodus, the arena was not about risk, but about glory. Each staged victory allowed him to present himself as a living god, a conqueror who ruled not only from the throne but from the sand. Commodus claimed hundreds of victories. Among all Roman emperors, none embraced the life of the gladiator more fully than Commodus. He is said to have fought in hundreds of bouts, often boasting of his victories. Ancient writers describe him battling wild animals, shooting arrows at leopards, or striking down opponents in the arena. Of course, these contests were hardly fair. His adversaries were often weakened or unarmed, ensuring that the emperor would emerge triumphant. Still, the crowds roared as he played the role of hero, basking in their admiration. Commodus even had statues of himself dressed as Hercules, further blurring the line between emperor, god, and gladiator. His obsession shocked Rome's elites, who believed such behavior degraded imperial dignity. Yet to the people, his presence in the arena was unforgettable. For a brief time, the emperor himself became part of the spectacle, a ruler who stepped into the sand alongside the men he owned. His participation shocked the Roman elite. When Emperor Commodus strode into the Colosseum dressed as a gladiator, the common people erupted in delight, but the senators and nobility were horrified. In Roman society, the arena was a stage for slaves, criminals, and outsiders, never for the ruler of the world. For the elites, an emperor lowering himself to fight in the sand diminished the dignity of the throne and threatened the delicate balance of Roman tradition. Yet Commodus seemed to delight in breaking those boundaries. He craved not just political power, but the adoration of the masses, and the games provided it in abundance. Every time he struck down an opponent, carefully chosen to ensure his victory, the people cheered, and Commodus basked in their devotion. His passion for the arena became infamous, remembered as both thrilling spectacle and dangerous vanity. To some Romans, he was a godlike hero, to others, a disgrace. Gladiators often wore elaborate helmets. The helmets of gladiators were more than simple protection. They were works of art. Crafted from bronze or iron, they were shaped into intricate forms, crested with feathers, topped with plumes, or adorned with animal motifs. Some were designed to resemble fish, others to mimic the faces of mythical creatures. These helmets gleamed under the Mediterranean sun, turning fighters into living statues of war. But they also came with heady burdens. Many weighed so much that a gladiator could barely see or hear, forcing him to rely on training and instinct. For the audience, however, the helmets added to the sense of theater. They transformed men into something larger than life, blurring the line between human and legend. Each helmet told a story, hinting at the role the gladiator was meant to play, soldier, hunter, or mythic hero within Rome's greatest stage, the roaring amphitheater. Their helmets were decorated with crests and symbols. Gladiatorial helmets were not plain tools of war. They were decorated with symbols meant to impress and inspire. Some bore elaborate crests shaped like fish, linking the wearer to the sea battles Rome had conquered. Others carried plumes of horsehair dyed in vivid colors, fluttering dramatically as the fighter moved. Some helmets were even engraved with mythological scenes or patterns meant to intimidate opponents and delight spectators. These decorations served a practical purpose too. They made gladiators more visible in the vast Colosseum, turning each fighter into a recognizable figure the crowd could cheer for or against. To the Romans, the designs added layers of meaning. A gladiator was never just a man, but a character, a symbol, a story, brought to life. Each helmet was part armor, part costume, reminding the crowd that the games were not only battles, but theater staged in the sand. Helmets were heavy and limited vision. Despite their beauty, gladiatorial helmets were often burdensome. Made from solid bronze or iron, some weighed more than 15 pounds, pressing heavily on the neck and shoulders. The visors, often elaborately designed, left only small eye slits for vision. This meant fighters could see only straight ahead, with little awareness of what lay to the sides. In the chaos of combat, this limitation was deliberate. It heightened the danger and forced gladiators to rely on instinct and training rather than sight alone. For the crowd, this made the fights more dramatic. A heavily armored man might not see an opponent circling to his flank until the last moment. For the gladiators, it was exhausting, both physically and mentally. Every movement demanded strength, balance, and focus. The helmets that glittered so brightly in the sun were both a shield and a cage, transforming protection into another deadly challenge. Gladiators learned to fight by sound and instinct. With their vision limited by heavy helmets, gladiators had to sharpen other senses. The clang of metal, the scrape of sand. Even the sound of an opponent's breath became clues to survival. Trainers drilled them endlessly, teaching them to read the rhythm of combat, to anticipate attacks from subtle shifts in weight or movement. Over time, many gladiators developed a heightened instinct, a sense of where a strike would come before it landed. To the audience, these split-second reactions looked like magic, as if the fighters possessed supernatural reflexes. In reality, it was the result of relentless practice, day after day in the ludus. The helmet may have blinded them, but it also forced them into a sharper awareness of every sound and sensation. For a gladiator, to fight was not only about strength, it was about listening to the sand, the steel, and the crowd's roar. Some matches were strictly regulated. Though the arena often seemed like a place of chaos, many gladiator duels were governed by rules. Referees, known as summa rudis, stood in the sand to oversee the fight. They watched closely, ensuring that both men followed the style assigned to them. A gladiator could not simply throw aside his weapon or switch tactics at will. If he fought dishonorably, the referee could stop the match and restore order. These rules were meant to protect the spectacle, keeping the combat fair and exciting rather than one-sided. For the crowd, it added to the drama, the knowledge that every fight was a test of skill within clear boundaries. For the gladiators, the rules could be both a protection and a danger. A referee might save a life if a man was badly wounded, but he could also demand that the combat continue, forcing fighters past exhaustion. Gladiators fought under referee supervision. In the center of the arena, amid the sand and sweat, stood not only two fighters but also one or more referees. These men carried staffs and wore distinctive robes, making them visible to the crowd. Their task was to maintain order, ensure fair play, and decide when the fight had been won. If a gladiator was disarmed but had fought bravely, the referee might pause the combat and look to the presiding official, often the emperor, for a final decision. The referee's job was dangerous. Standing between two armed men required both courage and authority. The crowd respected their role, for without referees the contest could dissolve into chaos. To the audience, the referee's raised staff was a signal that the fate of the fighters now hung in the balance, a moment of suspense that heightened the drama of the spectacle. The referee could stop the fight. The referee in a gladiatorial match was not a passive observer. He held the power to stop the combat when one man was clearly defeated, or when the rules of the contest had been broken. With a raised staff, he could step between fighters, halting the duel before it became a senseless slaughter. The final decision on life or death rested with the presiding official, but the referee's role was critical. He protected the investment of the gladiator's owner, ensured the fight followed the agreed-upon style, and preserved the entertainment value for the crowd. To the audience, the referee's intervention was part of the drama, a pause in the action that made the decision of mercy or death even more suspenseful. In this way, the referee became an unseen performer, guiding the rhythm of the fight and shaping the story that unfolded in the sand. Gladiators saluted the presiding official before battle. Before the first sword was raised, gladiators honored the person who had made the spectacle possible, the presiding official, often the emperor himself. Standing in the arena, weapons in hand, they saluted him with a ritual phrase and gesture. This act reminded everyone that the fighters' lives lay in his hands. The salute was not just ceremony, it was a declaration of obedience, a recognition that the ultimate decision, to spare or to slay, rested with one man. For the crowd, the salute was part of the pageantry, a signal that the drama was about to begin. For the gladiators, it was a moment of submission, a reminder that even their courage and skill might not decide their fate. The sand was theirs to fight upon, but the emperor was the final arbiter. One nod from him could preserve a life, or end it in an instant. The famous phrase, "We who are about to die salute you," is debated. Few lines are as closely linked to the gladiators as the phrase, "We who are about to die salute you." For centuries, it has been imagined as the standard greeting shouted by fighters to the emperor before combat. But ancient sources suggest otherwise. The phrase appears only once, in a single account of a mock naval battle staged by Emperor Claudius. In that story, the fighters pleaded for mercy, shouting the words as a desperate farewell. There is little evidence that gladiators used the phrase regularly. Historians now believe it was not a traditional salute, but a unique moment that later became legend. Still, the words captured the imagination of later generations, echoing through paintings, plays, and films. Even if the phrase was never common in ancient Rome, it endures as a haunting symbol of the gladiator's life, a reminder of how myth and memory intertwine across time. Gladiators could earn rich rewards. Although many gladiators began as slaves or prisoners, victory in the arena could bring astonishing rewards. Successful fighters might receive purses of coins, fine clothes, or even gifts from wealthy admirers. Some were presented with palm branches, symbols of triumph, while others were showered with gold or silver by grateful patrons. For a man who once lived in chains, this sudden wealth could feel like a miracle. It offered the possibility of better food, improved living conditions, or even the chance to buy one's freedom. The promise of reward gave every fight an added intensity. Each blow struck in the arena was not only for survival, but for a future that might hold comfort instead of hardship. For the audience, seeing a gladiator clutch his prize under the gaze of the emperor was deeply satisfying. Proof that courage, at least sometimes, was richly rewarded. Victors sometimes received gold or land. Beyond the coins tossed into the arena, truly exceptional gladiators could be rewarded with treasures that went far beyond a night's winnings. Some were granted generous sums of gold, enough to live comfortably, or even buy property. A few, especially those who had won the adoration of the crowd, were given land to farm, a rare privilege in a society where land ownership defined status. These rewards transformed the fortunes of men who had once been prisoners or slaves, offering them a chance at stability and even respect. Yet wealth did not always bring peace. Many victorious gladiators chose to return to the arena, unable to resist the thrill of combat or the roar of the crowd. The promise of gold and land was real, but it was not always enough to break the spell of the amphitheater, where risk and glory walked hand in hand. Gladiators could become bodyguards after retirement. When gladiators finally earned their freedom, they faced a question: what came next? For many, the answer was to become bodyguards. Their reputation as fearless fighters made them valuable protectors for wealthy Romans, who were eager to surround themselves with living symbols of strength. A former gladiator, scarred yet celebrated, was both an ornament and a shield. His presence at a nobleman's side sent a clear message. Here was a man worth guarding, a man of power and wealth. For the gladiator, this work offered security and purpose, allowing him to use his hard-won skills outside the arena. It was dangerous, but far less so than the sand. Some bodyguards became trusted companions, others intimidating enforcers. In a world where violence was never far away, an ex-gladiator's loyalty could be priceless, and his presence alone could command both fear and respect in Rome's crowded, unpredictable streets. Some became trainers in the gladiator schools. For many retired gladiators, the arena was not something to leave behind, but something to return to in a new role. These men became doctors, the trainers of new recruits in the gladiator schools. They had survived countless battles, and their scars were their credentials. Young fighters learned not only the mechanics of combat, but the mental discipline to survive under pressure. The trainer's voice echoed across the yard, correcting stances, demanding precision, and punishing mistakes. To the trainees, these men were both teachers and living legends, proof that survival was possible. For the retired gladiator, training offered a way to remain close to the world he knew, without the constant threat of death. It was steady work, respected within the ludus, and it allowed him to pass down his knowledge. In this way, the skills of the arena endured, preserved by those who had lived them. Others became instructors for wealthy Romans. Gladiators were masters of combat, and their skills were not limited to the arena. After retirement, some became private instructors for wealthy Romans who wanted to learn the art of fighting. For noblemen, training with a former gladiator was both practical and fashionable. It provided not only exercise, but also a connection to the excitement of the arena. Some aristocrats even trained in gladiatorial styles themselves, seeing it as a way to toughen the body and spirit. For the retired fighter, teaching the elite offered prestige and steady pay, a remarkable transformation for a man who might once have been a slave or a prisoner. To stand in the gardens of a senator's villa, guiding the sword strokes of a young noble, was a strange reversal of fortune. It showed how gladiators, through skill and survival, could carve out unexpected roles in Roman society after their release. Children of gladiators sometimes inherited the trade. For some gladiators, the arena was not just a career, but a family legacy. Children born to gladiators often grew up within the walls of the ludus, surrounded by the clang of weapons and the discipline of training. Sons, in particular, were sometimes expected to follow in their father's footsteps, becoming fighters themselves. In a society where class and status were often fixed, the child of a gladiator could easily be drawn into the same fate. Yet this inheritance carried both pride and danger. To continue the family tradition meant embracing a life of risk, but it also meant a chance at fame. In rare cases, whole families of gladiators became famous, their names known across the empire. For the children, the sand was both playground and destiny. Their lives remind us how deeply the arena was woven into Roman society, shaping not only individuals, but entire bloodlines. Gladiators often lived in communal barracks. The gladiator schools of Rome were more than training grounds. They were prisons. Fighters lived in communal barracks, sleeping side by side in cramped quarters. The walls were high, the gates locked, and guards kept constant watch to prevent escape. Life in these barracks was harsh but orderly. The men trained by day ate simple meals of grain and beans and returned to their cells at night. Yet within these confines, they forged bonds. Friendships grew out of shared hardship, and rivalries simmered in the crowded quarters. For some, the barracks became a kind of brotherhood, a place where men from across the empire learned each other's languages, shared stories, and prepared for battle. For the Romans who owned them, the barracks were a way to protect investments. For the gladiators, they were both prison and home, the space where they became fighters and, sometimes, legends. Barracks were guarded to prevent escape. Gladiator schools were designed as fortresses. Their high walls and heavy gates kept fighters inside, guarded day and night by soldiers. The reason was simple. Gladiators were valuable property, trained at great expense, and their escape would mean financial loss. But the walls also kept the fighters safe from the outside world. Families of defeated opponents might seek revenge, or angry crowds might try to attack them. Inside the barracks, at least, they were protected, though the price was their freedom. Escape was rare, but not unheard of. Some gladiators tried to break free, risking their lives in daring bids for liberty. The most famous example came when the gladiator Spartacus led a massive revolt, turning escape into open rebellion. The heavy gates and watchtowers were Rome's attempt to prevent such uprisings, though history shows that even the strongest walls could not always contain desperate men. Gladiators formed brotherhoods within the schools. Inside the gladiator schools, men lived under constant discipline, watched by guards and driven through punishing training. Yet even in these harsh conditions, bonds of brotherhood formed. Gladiators shared meals, endured pain together, and often fought side by side in the arena. These connections became lifelines, offering comfort in a world defined by danger. Fighters formed groups called collegia, associations that gave them a sense of belonging and mutual support. Within these brotherhoods, men looked after one another, pooled resources, and honored fallen comrades with proper funerals. To the outside world, gladiators were disposable, mere entertainment. But within the ludus, these bonds offered dignity and solidarity. The crowd might see them as enemies locked in combat, but behind the scenes, they were brothers, bound by shared hardship. Their brotherhoods reveal the human heart of the gladiatorial world, companionship in the shadow of the arena's violence. They held rituals and shared meals together. Life in the gladiator schools was not only about training and combat. In the evenings, after the drills and sparring had ended, gladiators gathered to share simple meals of bread, porridge, and beans. These meals were not lavish, but they became moments of community, when fighters could laugh, tell stories, and forget for a while the dangers of tomorrow. Gladiators also held rituals honoring the gods who watched over the arena. They prayed for strength, courage, and sometimes mercy, leaving offerings to deities like Mars, the god of war, or Nemesis, the goddess of fate. These shared rituals created bonds among men who might one day face each other in combat. In the glow of lamplight, with voices raised in prayer or song, the barracks became a place of brotherhood. The rituals were reminders that even in a world of blood and sand, meaning and connection endured. Gladiators had their own superstitions. Life in the arena was unpredictable, so gladiators often turned to superstition for comfort. Many believed in lucky charms, sacred rituals, or small gestures that might tip fate in their favor. Some refused to enter the arena with their left foot first, fearing it would invite misfortune. Others avoided certain foods or repeated short prayers under their breath before a fight. Small rituals, a touch of the sand, a gesture toward the sky, gave them a sense of control in a world where survival was never guaranteed. The Roman people too watched for these signs, interpreting them as omens of victory or defeat. For the gladiators, superstition was more than tradition. It was a fragile shield against fear, a way to believe that destiny might be swayed. In the silence before combat began, faith and ritual offered a moment of calm amid the chaos to come. Amulets and charms were common in the arena. Gladiators often carried tiny objects believed to bring luck and protection. These could be small pendants shaped like phalluses, thought to ward off evil spirits, or amulets inscribed with magical words. Some tied charms to their armor. Others tucked them into belts or hid them under their clothing. These tokens, often gifts from loved ones, were powerful reminders of home and hope. A small trinket might seem insignificant against a sword or a lion's claws, yet for the gladiator it symbolized more than physical protection. It was a promise that the gods might still be watching. The crowd rarely saw these hidden objects, but they carried their own drama. A man walking into combat with a charm close to his heart, trusting it to carry him through. In a world where fate was uncertain, a simple amulet offered a glimmer of comfort, a personal anchor against overwhelming odds. Some prayed to the goddess Nemesis before battle. Among the many gods of Rome, one held a special place in the hearts of gladiators. Nemesis, the goddess of retribution and balance. To the Romans, Nemesis ensured that fortune never tilted too far in one direction, punishing arrogance and rewarding fairness. Gladiators often prayed to her before stepping into the arena, asking that their courage be recognized and that their fates be just. Shrines to Nemesis stood near amphitheaters, where fighters and spectators alike left offerings. Some gladiators carved her image onto their weapons or whispered her name in the moments before combat began. For men who lived by chance, facing death in every duel, the idea of divine balance was deeply comforting. It promised that even if they fell, their bravery would be honored and justice would be done. To the Romans watching, Nemesis herself seemed present, weighing the scales as each sword was raised. Gladiators were associated with Mars, the god of war. The god Mars, fierce and unyielding, was Rome's patron of war. Gladiators, living embodiments of combat, were naturally linked to him. Many gladiator schools contained shrines to Mars, where fighters prayed for strength, courage, and victory. Before stepping into the arena, gladiators might dedicate their battle to the god, hoping to draw his favor. For the Roman crowd, watching gladiators fight was like witnessing Mars himself at play. Every strike and every clash of steel became a tribute to the empire's martial spirit. Some gladiators were even dressed to resemble warriors from Rome's early wars, further tying them to the god who had once been seen as the father of Rome's people. To fight bravely was to honor Mars, to win was to prove his blessing. In the thunder of the arena, the boundary between man and God blurred, and the fighters became avatars of divine war. Wealthy Romans sometimes collected gladiator blood. For many Romans, gladiators were more than entertainment. They were believed to possess a special power. One of the strangest practices of the time was the collection of gladiators' blood. After a fight, when the sand was still wet with crimson, some spectators would rush forward to gather it. The blood was thought to contain strength, vitality, even magical properties. Wealthy Romans might purchase small vials as tokens, sometimes wearing them as amulets. Others believed that drinking gladiator blood could cure epilepsy or grant vigor. To modern minds, it seems a disturbing ritual, but to the Romans, it reflected a fascination with life, death, and the mysterious power of the human body. For gladiators, this practice was a reminder that even in death, they were valuable, their very blood considered a prize. The arena transformed them into symbols, their lives and deaths feeding Roman imagination. It was believed to have healing powers. Roman writers tell us that the blood of slain gladiators was thought to cure illnesses, particularly epilepsy. Physicians sometimes prescribed it as a remedy, instructing patients to drink the still warm liquid in hopes of gaining strength or expelling disease. To modern ears, the idea is unsettling, but in the ancient world, blood was seen as the very essence of life. The vitality of a strong gladiator, they believed, could pass into the body of the sick. This belief made gladiator blood a valuable commodity, eagerly sought by those desperate for healing. Vendors may even have sold sponges soaked in it after the games, offering the public a chance to purchase strength itself. While we know today that such remedies held no medical power, the practice reveals how deeply Romans linked the spectacle of the arena with ideas of vitality, sacrifice, and the mysterious energy of life itself. Some thought gladiator sweat was an aphrodisiac. In the fevered imagination of ancient Rome, even a gladiator's sweat carried a lure. Women in the crowd were said to collect it in small containers, sometimes mixed with dust from the arena sand. This mixture, though strange to modern sensibilities, was believed to have powerful aphrodisiac qualities. Roman writers joked and sometimes complained about noblewomen who adored gladiators, swooning at the scent of their sweat as though it carried irresistible charm. The idea came from a belief that the courage and vitality of a fighter were contained not only in his blood, but in every drop of his body. For the gladiator himself, this devotion could be both flattering and dangerous, drawing him into affairs that scandalized Roman society. Yet the fascination persisted. The idea that sweat, born of struggle and survival, could inspire passion shows how gladiators became symbols of desire as well as violence. Gladiator bones have been found in mass graves. Archaeology has uncovered haunting reminders of gladiators in the form of mass graves. At sites like Ephesus, large burial grounds contain the remains of men who died in the arena. Their skeletons reveal the brutal reality of combat. Some bear deep cuts from swords or axes, others show crushed skulls or shattered bones. Many have healed injuries too, evidence that gladiators often survived repeated wounds before finally succumbing. These graves tell us what ancient texts sometimes obscure, that life as a gladiator was short, harsh, and painful. Yet they also reveal care. Some skeletons show signs of medical treatment, proof that gladiators received skilled attention in life. Burial in a dedicated graveyard suggests that their comrades, or their schools, honored them after death. Though the crowds may have cheered their final moments, the traces left in the earth remind us of the human cost of Rome's spectacles. Archaeology has revealed their training diets. For years, scholars debated what gladiators ate to maintain their strength. Ancient sources described them as hordeari, barley men. Excavations at sites like Ephesus provided new answers. Analysis of gladiator bones revealed high levels of minerals and isotopes, consistent with a diet heavy in grains and legumes, particularly barley and beans. This was not the protein-rich diet we might expect of professional fighters. Instead, it was heavy on carbohydrates, designed to build bulk and provide lasting energy for long fights in the arena. To supplement this, gladiators drank a strange beverage made from plant ash mixed with water, which provided calcium to strengthen their bones. The diet was practical, inexpensive, and surprisingly effective. Though it lacked variety, it kept the men strong enough to endure the punishing demands of training and combat. In the sands of the Colosseum, even a simple bowl of barley could mean survival. Roman writers recorded the glory of famous fighters. Gladiators lived and died in the arena, but some achieved a form of immortality through the written word. Roman poets and historians recorded their names, their victories, and their bravery. Graffiti on city walls shouted their praises, but in literature, their legends took on new life. Writers compared them to heroes of myth, describing their courage in battle or their striking appearance. Even in a society that saw gladiators as lowly, The feats of certain fighters captured the imagination. A gladiator who displayed bravery in defeat could be celebrated in verse, remembered as a hero, even as he fell beneath his opponent's sword. These writings preserve the voices of the crowd, the emotions of the arena, and the fascination that gladiators inspired. Long after the sand was swept clean, their stories lived on in ink and memory, ensuring that the fighters were never entirely forgotten. Gladiators could be foreign prisoners of war. Many gladiators were not Romans at all. Instead, they were prisoners of war, captured during Rome's endless campaigns. Defeated soldiers from Gaul, Thrace, or Africa were often sold into slavery and sent to the ludus to train as fighters. To the Roman audience, these men were exotic, representing the empire's many conquered peoples. Their foreign styles of combat were woven into the spectacle, adding variety and excitement. Yet behind the masks and armor were real men, torn from their homes, forced to fight for survival in a strange city. For them, the arena was not a stage, but a sentence. Still, some managed to adapt, mastering the skills of the gladiator and even winning fame. Their presence reminded Romans of the reach of their empire. Every fight was a reenactment of conquest, with real human lives paying the price for Rome's hunger for power and entertainment. They came from all corners of the empire. The Roman Empire stretched from the deserts of North Africa to the forests of Britain, and its gladiators reflected this vast reach. Fighters were drawn from conquered peoples: Gauls, Thracians, Numidians, Syrians, and many more. Each brought their own traditions of warfare, which were then reshaped into distinct gladiatorial styles. To the Roman audience, the arena became a living map of their empire. They could watch a man dressed as a barbarian from distant lands battle a gladiator in the gear of a Roman legionary, reliving the conquests that had built their power. For the fighters, however, the arena was often a place of exile, far from their homelands. They spoke different languages, practiced unfamiliar customs, yet shared the same harsh training and the same dangers. The Colosseum thus became a meeting place of cultures, where Rome's dominion over countless peoples was displayed in blood and spectacle. Some were condemned criminals sent to fight. Not every gladiator came from foreign battlefields. Many were condemned criminals, sentenced to fight in the arena as punishment. For these men, the games were often a death sentence disguised as entertainment. Instead of prison or execution in the shadows, their fate was made public, turned into a spectacle for the Roman people. They were forced into gladiator schools, trained to fight, and then thrown into the sand, often against more skilled opponents or wild animals. To the crowd, their deaths served as both punishment and entertainment, a reminder of the consequences of crime. Yet even among criminals, some fought with such courage that they won the crowd's admiration and occasionally their freedom. The arena thus became a place where fate could twist unexpectedly. A man condemned to die might, through skill and bravery, transform into a celebrated fighter, his shame recast as legend before thousands. Gladiator schools existed across Rome and beyond. Though the Colosseum is the most famous stage, gladiatorial schools were spread across the Roman Empire. These institutions, called ludi, existed in major cities from Rome itself to provincial capitals like Capua or Trier. Each school was run like a fortress, with barracks, training yards, and strict discipline. Trainers, often retired gladiators, drilled recruits relentlessly, shaping them into performers fit for the arena. Local governors and wealthy citizens sponsored the schools, knowing that successful fighters could bring both profit and prestige. For the gladiators, life in these schools was harsh but structured, offering food, shelter, and purpose in exchange for obedience. The spread of such institutions across the empire shows just how deeply the games were woven into Roman culture. No matter how far from the capital, citizens could gather in their own amphitheaters to watch fighters trained in the same brutal art, sharing in the empire's spectacle. Pompeii's amphitheater still holds gladiator graffiti. In the ruins of Pompeii, the city frozen in time by volcanic ash, archaeologists have discovered remarkable evidence of the gladiatorial world. The amphitheater, one of the oldest surviving in the Roman world, still carries graffiti scratched into its walls. These inscriptions often praised specific fighters, boasting of their victories or expressing admiration. Some are little more than names, while others are elaborate declarations of loyalty, as though written by ancient fans. One graffiti proudly records that a certain gladiator won victory after victory, while another compares a fighter to Mars, the god of war. These marks, etched nearly 2,000 years ago, remind us that the gladiators were not just performers, but heroes to ordinary people. Standing in the silent ruins today, one can still trace the letters carved by hands long gone, hearing faint echoes of the cheers that once filled the stone amphitheater. Mosaics show realistic gladiator duels. Across the Roman Empire, mosaics decorated the floors of villas, bathhouses, and even taverns. Many of these intricate artworks depicted gladiatorial combat in vivid detail. Unlike later romanticized images, these mosaics often showed the fighters with surprising realism, blood flowing from wounds, broken shields scattered on the ground, and names carefully inscribed beside each figure. They served as both art and record, preserving the memory of particular matches and celebrated fighters. For the Romans who commissioned them, these mosaics were a way of bringing the excitement of the arena into their homes, a reminder of the courage and spectacle they had witnessed. Today, they give us a precious window into the details of gladiator armor, weapons, and fighting styles. Each tile, carefully set by hand, freezes a moment of combat in time, a silent echo of a long-ago cheer, preserved in stone and color for centuries. Gladiators inspired later European tournaments. Though the gladiatorial games eventually faded, their influence endured. In medieval Europe, the tournaments of knights bore striking similarities to Rome's spectacles. Knights fought with lances and swords before cheering crowds, their armor gleaming under the sun, their contests often tied to ceremony and pageantry. Like gladiators, they became celebrities, admired for their courage and skill. The tournament field was safer than the Roman arena, with rules designed to reduce fatalities, yet the echoes of gladiatorial combat remained. The idea of combat as public entertainment, of warriors as performers, survived long after the last Roman games ended. Even the structure of arenas influenced later jousting fields and tournament grounds. The gladiator's legacy then was not lost with the fall of Rome. It was transformed, reshaped for a new age, reminding us that the thrill of watching men test themselves in combat is as old as history itself. Modern sports still carry their spirit. When we watch modern athletes compete in stadiums filled with thousands of cheering fans, we are, in some sense, witnessing the legacy of the gladiators. The Colosseum set the template for mass entertainment, vast arenas, carefully staged contests, and the collective roar of the crowd. Though today's competitions are not battles to the death, they share the same rhythms of anticipation, struggle, and triumph. Athletes are celebrated like heroes, their names shouted by fans, their images spread across posters and screens. The language of combat lingers too. We still speak of athletes fighting for victory, battling opponents, or being gladiators on the field. The spirit of the ancient arena has simply shifted into new forms, from football stadiums to boxing rings. In every cheer, every contest, and every champion, we can hear faint echoes of Rome's gladiators, men who once turned survival into spectacle. The word gladiator comes from gladius, the Roman sword. The very name, gladiator, reveals the heart of their identity. It comes from gladius, the Latin word for sword, the weapon most closely associated with Roman soldiers. The choice of this term was deliberate. To the Roman people, gladiators were echoes of their legions, men whose skill with the blade reminded them of Rome's military might. Yet there was an irony in the name. Many gladiators were not Romans at all, but foreigners, slaves, or criminals. They fought with Roman weapons, but often against fighters dressed to resemble Rome's enemies. In this way, the word gladiator carried layers of meaning, a symbol of Roman martial values, but also of the empire's power to turn conquered men into entertainment. Today, the word still carries weight, evoking images of courage, struggle, and survival. It reminds us how a single sword became the symbol of an entire world. The legacy of gladiators still echoes in popular culture. Though the gladiatorial games ended more than 1,000 years ago, their legacy still echoes all around us. Films, novels, and television shows retell their stories, often blending myth and history. Sports stars are called modern gladiators, their contests described in the language of combat. Even our stadiums, vast arenas filled with cheering crowds, descend directly from the amphitheaters of Rome. The fascination endures because the gladiators embodied something timeless, the human struggle with danger, honor, and mortality. They were men who lived on the edge, whose courage and suffering were transformed into spectacle. Today, when we watch a dramatic match or hear the roar of a crowd, we hear faint echoes of the Colosseum. The gladiators are long gone, their bones buried in the earth, but their spirit lingers. In our stories, our sports, and our imagination, their legacy continues to fight on. And so, dear listener, we leave the roar of the Colosseum behind us. The sand has settled, the torches have burned low, and the echoes of the crowd fade into the quiet of memory. The gladiators themselves are long gone, their bones resting in ancient earth, but their stories linger in stone mosaics, in faded graffiti, and in the very words we still use today. They remind us of humanity's strange fascination with courage, with spectacle, and with the fragile line between life and death. Thank you for wandering through this history with me, step by step, fact by fact. I hope these glimpses into Rome's arenas have stirred your imagination, not with noise and blood, but with wonder and reflection. Sleep well, knowing that even the fiercest battles of the past have quieted into history's gentle whisper. Good night.